Welcome to The Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Carl Boutet, welcome back to The Voice of Retail podcast. How are you, my friend?
Michael LeBlanc, nice seeing you in person like the good old days. This is exciting at an event, not to say. I mean, this is quite honestly a little overwhelming, but I'll do my best to adjust.
Well, thank you for joining me. We're live here at the Seattle Food Innovation Show in actually, we're in the Food Professor podcast studio that we built here, but today we're talking for the Voice of Retail. You look good, man. I mean, it's good to see you. It's good to see you in person, not just on the screen.
And I'm wearing pants because most of the time, which you don't know when we've had our previous conversations, I was probably in my basement in my underwear, but probably too much information. And thank you to Sylvain for making this beautiful space available. I'll tell him the check is in the mail.
Very good. I will do so. So it's my first time to Montreal since COVID. Not my first conference. I was at Shop Talk in Vegas. You and I were talking off mic about that.
Yeah.
10,000 attendees, one mask. That was me.
10,000 to 1 ratio. I got to like that.
It's a bit overwhelming. I mean, we were all saying I was there with Steve Dennis, of course, and we were saying...
Who?
Steve Dennis, one of the amigos, one of the three amigos.
Oh, yeah. No, I think I've heard of the guy somewhere, yeah.
Mr. Bifurcation, I think. Who is it? Jason and Scott show.
He's always split in two. I got it, right.
The Jason and Scott show called him Mr. Bifurcation last episode, which we all had a good laugh at.
Sounds like an intestinal disease, but other than that, it's all good. I love Steve.
Well, listen, let's jump right in. So for those who may not have heard our previous discussions, tell us a quick little bit about yourself, and then let's catch up.
Carl Boutet. I am a retail strategist who's part-time, I can say professor now, I think. I mean, I don't know, the last contract I saw seemed to say it was some sort of adjunct something or other. And advisor, and just somebody who loves to jam with you whenever the opportunity presents.
Now, you and I met. You were we met through Retail Council of Canada.
Yeah.
You weren't in the education space yet, so talk all about that. You're with the McGill School, right?
So I'm actually with two schools. It did launch with McGill, and I'm still very much with McGill. The original sort of first contact was around the Ben Sudun School of Retail Management. When that was announced, press release came out. The next day was in the office of the academic director, Professor Saibal Ray, and saying, how can I support this? Because our industry desperately needs this more formal, sort of structured, rigorous support. And I'd been looking at that. I've been shopping for a couple of years, quite honestly, to do a retail lab here in Montreal. And in the press release, there was this one sentence that said, and eventually there will be an innovation center. So I offered to Professor Ray, said, listen, anything I can do, I've been researching the heck out of innovation centers in retail around the world.
Right.
They come in many shapes and forms, but I'd love to, McGill would clearly be a really interesting extension of that. So that's where the relationship started, evolved into becoming an advisor for the what they call the Retail Innovation Lab now. And
that's and is it Couche-Tard's who's involved in that?
Yeah. So it evolved into becoming basically a frictionless. Well, one portion of it is a frictionless Couche-Tard experience, the first actually frictionless store in Canada, which is like a fully autonomous, Amazon Go-esque sort of experience. Scan your app, walk in, grab what you want, walk out. So it's a good location, and it's open to the public. So anybody can go on Sherbrooke Street in the Bronfman building and try that experience. All you need is the app, which you can obviously on site put on. So that's how that's what it's evolved to. There's a couple of other things happening in and around that as well, and it's still evolving. And I also began teaching at the beginning of the pandemic marketing at the Executive Institute, and super stoked to be teaching in May, Michael, and I think you'll recognize this sort of being my sweet spot, but the first, as far as I'm aware, nobody's pushed back yet, and pretty familiar with the space, but the first master's level class in emerging technologies and new business models in the retail school.
Wow.
So for the Masters of Retail program, it's a complimentary course that's being offered as an intensive in May, so it's going to be kind of a rough ride for that, but it's so stimulating, and it's going to give me a chance to, sort of share the stuff I'm most passionate about with the the master's students that are going to be a part of it.
Well, let's continue down the professorial thing, because you also are doing some stuff in Asia, right?
Yeah, so actually along the line, we'll talk about, I'm sure come back to the Great Acceleration later, but so the launch of the Acceleration for me was January 2020. I was chairing the ASEAN Retail Summit, so Southeast Asia Retail Summit. I was asked to come and chair that.
And you just got back from Cairo, from my recollection, right?
Cairo was actually in 2019. I was in Cairo that summer before, which was, definitely part of a world tour. But the this Asian Institute of Technology, or this opportunity to teach in Asia, came from being in Bangkok for this ASEAN Summit in January 2020. Early January 2020, and was introduced to the dean of the business school there. And we'd mentioned that he said, I was talking about the work I was doing with McGill at that point, and he's like, I'd love to if you come and teach maybe a marketing course for us. And I'm actually going back in June. This is the first time I'm doing it in person, because I began with them that spring teaching online at their MBA level. Right. And it was an amazing experience. But that was the reason why I said launch of the Great Acceleration there, is because on the way back from that trip, I stopped in Shanghai and was literally like T-minus 1 week in front of Wuhan. Obviously, without really knowing that's what was going on, but
and they're back at it again. Shanghai today, as we speak, we're here in mid-April. This zero tolerance policy is just causing chaos, both for the people there and supply chain. And do you think, one retailer said to me, and there's been this kind of narrative going around that it's the end of globalization as we knew it, which always seems to me a pretty extreme position to take as we knew it. But it does feel, even talking to retailers here, they're like, it's so unpredictable and it's so far away, and we're not out of COVID yet, and maybe we should be sourcing closer to home. And what do you think? Are you hearing
Absolutely,
the same thing?
Yeah, I'm definitely hearing the same thing. I think there's two sort of parallels happening here. The first one is, I think it's the idea that we became over-optimized, and I'm a big fan of data and always trying to find the optimal sort of outcomes. But the reality is,
Roger Martin talked about that in his book, right?
Yeah, he got it all from me. But anyways, kidding. The idea that we were just we got it down to such a specific way of doing one thing, that it had to come from one place and come here in one specific manner, isn't resilient.
At a very specific time, right?
Yeah.
Right to the day, or whatever. Yeah.
So a boat, my analogy on this, a boat goes sideways into Suez and you're screwed.
Right. Supply chain went sideways.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, and we seem to not totally have learned from that, because I have friends or people that I know that are in Europe who, and I think this is going to affect us in North America as well, but they rerouted to rail over Russia. How much of a good idea is that right now? So, without getting too geopolitical, so the idea is we need resilience. We need to sort of create, plan A, B, C, D, and not just have empty shelves because the boat went sideways in the Suez, or because our rail car is stuck somewhere between a border with Russia and whatever. So that's the first awakening. The second thing that I'm hearing about, Michael, and I'd be curious to get your feedback if you're hearing as well, is I'm hearing some really big retail names, think the biggest in North America, that are putting a lot of pressure on their suppliers to get out of China. For several reasons, and including the ones we just named and maybe beyond. And not to get too catastrophe scenario-ish. I think the idea is, again, these large retailers are saying, listen, we need you to shift your manufacturing away from these areas that we have less control over. And I'm hearing, again, that at the highest level in a lot of different segments. And they're saying, and so you're seeing a lot of movement towards Latin America, which I have some presence there, and
I gotta think Mexico be a big winner.
That's Galloway's thing. Our friend Scott, right? He's been very bullish on Mexico, but I can tell you, in textile, you're looking at places like Peru and Chile. In tech, you're looking at places like Colombia and Brazil that are much more advanced than we give them credit for. I was just in Colombia. My only international travel the last 2 years was being invited to an event in Colombia in the fall. The startup ecosystem is crazy there. So yes, I think the idea is we need to we kind of got a little too focused on specific parts of Asia. There are always going to be parts, so I think the end of globalization, I think, is a bit of a push. But I think the idea of being overly dependent on one form of globalization is definitely not a good idea.
You've talked about the acceleration. You mentioned it a couple of times. You put a book out about this time last year, if I get the date right.
You're close.
It's a great book. I think I had you on the podcast that time talking about the Great Acceleration. So, all right, let's talk about the Great Acceleration. The book was issued a year ago. You probably wrote it a year and a half ago. Looking back, and this is the same question I asked Scott Galloway. You mentioned Scott, who says hi, by the way, when I was talking to him. He said, I know that
guy Carl and Miguel.
That guy Carl and Miguel. Steve Dennis, we talk about this. If you had to go back and do it all over again, right as second edition, would you change anything? Times have changed. We've got inflation now. We've got some normalization. We've got the digital native vertical brands. Some of them are just collapsing around our feet.
Yep.
Would you? If you did a revised edition, what would it look like?
Well, first of all, I've actually already done 2 revised editions. Because the nature of the book is that it's a very digital project, right. and it's rarely printed. I just did another reprint, but it's so actually the reeditions are not so much around the content, the written content. It's around the data, which is at the second half or the last third of the book, which is sort of tracking the data points around mostly e-commerce, which is sort of counterintuitive because I tell people that it's not just about e-commerce, and I think that's the big lesson about the acceleration that it's missed is people tend to focus, and I'm guilty of it obviously because I put these data points in my own book saying it's not just about e-commerce, it's around digitizing the path to purchase. I think is much more a better way to look at it than just e-commerce versus in-store, which I think is really missing the bigger and more important point.
As it always has been. I think it's fair though to say, and pushback on the pushback. Steve and I were talking about this, that in Canada, we had one of the world's biggest growths of e-commerce, 70%, right? 70% year-over-year growth. And I would have to say, when you look at our market, which traditionally has been behind, for example, the U.S. market, the U.K. market, I do think we had
some catching up.
I think we had 3 to 5 years of growth, and I'm hearing that the waterline has not receded. So I think, like many things, the U.S. perhaps less so by the numbers, but Canada, I think we had a great acceleration in e-commerce.
Again, if we're just looking at e-commerce, we could debate out versus the categories. We're here at a food show. We know food had some serious catching up to do, and I was actually speaking yesterday at an event that was very food centric as well, and if you look at the investments that the people around that table were making, that they were planning, they were already thinking 2025, we need to automate, last mile, and we need to think about changing our distribution centers to be able to better accommodate. Because what did we do with grocery stores? We turned them into fulfillment centers, which just don't work. I don't know about you, but when I walk around my grocery store and I'm bumping into pickers all over the place, it's not a good experience. The store wasn't designed for the picker, right? So we're having so these ideas, these investments, just to name names, Metro have a $400 million project being distribution center, automated distribution center that was pushed forward by a couple of years, coming up just north of here in Laval.
You have Voila, Sobeys Voila now in IGA, right?
That was my next example here on the
Have you tried it here? I've tried it at home because it's pretty new. It's pretty.
Yeah,
recent, right?
and here's the thing: I tried it not in the peak of the pandemic because it was 3 to 4 weeks to get the grocery delivery when I probably wanted it the most. Hence, why all the resource allocation shifted and said, okay, maybe we don't need to have 30% online grocery right now, but we saw what that sort of future looks like and how ill prepared we are for it for all the right reasons. I mean, I'm not knocking leadership for not having better anticipated. Although, if you look at a very interesting example in Steve's world. Down Wegmans down in Texas, they saw the numbers, they were preparing for it, and they obviously benefited from it. So so I mean that's the great acceleration. I still believe. I think is sort of there's a lot of other greats. I don't know if you noticed that came along, and I still claim my fame with the. You
are. Every time I say it, an angel gets its wings, man.
Thank you. I think I do appreciate that, and it was thanks to Steve as well because it was at his event, his first of many book launches that we coined that with Scott and Seth there as well. And I'm if anything, I'm doubling down, because I think it sort of is the master concept, because over all the great resignation, the great not redistribution but reattribution, all the greats that sort of are all extensions of what we accelerated. Now, your point about the waterline receding or not is absolutely fair, and we can look at the data in many different lights. But I still come back to this idea of a very primary sort of principle: is there anybody out there that thinks that we're going to be less digital 5 years from now than we are now?
That's fair.
And the idea that this is going to push us more. Now, it doesn't remove the need for physical. It actually, for me, it makes the need for physical that much more important. And that's also the other part that's often missed. They think, the great acceleration is all about e-commerce adoption and digital fulfillment, but it's really about how one makes the other stronger. And that is when the subtitle of the book is actually more important: the race to retail resilience. That race to resilience is all about building these muscle groups that make you as strong physically as they do digitally. Because we're not, I don't think I'm shocking anybody, and definitely not you, Michael, saying we're not over with these sort of major headwinds that we're going to hit. Be them, may they be public health, may they be geopolitical, may they be climate related. Which
it's funny. We're a little bit like the distracted goldfish, right? It's COVID, and then it's
war,
Russia, and war. Both of which are terrible.
Supply chain and a container that went up 10x and
10x, but then behind all of it there's no vaccine for the environmental catastrophe that's headed our way. It's already, the next 30 years are already planned out, so to speak, right? So we still have to figure that out. Let's move on. I want to talk about innovation. So you talked about the innovation lab. My perception, I want to get your perception, was there wasn't a ton of innovation happening during COVID. Mostly retailers are either trying to survive or trying to just get product on the shelf. There's some innovation behind the scenes. So I'm hoping. And, retailers are telling me they're spending a lot of capital, right? Yep. So that is a nice leading indicator that we're going to see a good long run, a couple of years of investment and innovation. So bringing you back to the Innovation Center, at what point does that get scaled? Like, it's now sitting in a building. It's a lovely building near McGill. At what point do they say it works and let's put it in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50? How do retailers figure out where to pull that trigger?
Well, so first of all, they've already sort of scaled it in the U.S., not using the same exact approach as they used at McGill, but Circle K, which is what Couche-Tard is for the rest of the world outside of Quebec, is in Arizona and elsewhere. They're if you're going to be in convenience, then frictionless has to be part of convenience in some way, right? So they're
it's made for it. The Amazon Go store is made. It's a convenience store with fresh sandwiches, right?
Well, and now even into grocery and other,
Do you think that's a big, if you think about table stakes versus differentiators? So frictionless more and more becomes a table stake, at some level. But at the level of kind of shop, buy and go or one touch go, that starts to become a differentiator. I think Amazon's betting in their bigger format grocery stores that becomes the thing that makes them successful. I'm not sure I'm on board with that. I'm not sure people would go to a large format store for that purpose. Versus a Wegmans or an H-E-B or, they got to pull somebody away from where they're shopping today. They got to have all the other things, right? Fresh food and great prices. Is it enough? How do you see it?
So right now there's a couple of, it's cost prohibitive. So the cost of the tech stack is not, the ROI is unless you use a subsidized one like taking Amazon's, because you can license their tech, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend, because who knows how.
That didn't work out when they were licensing out with a web tech for a few companies. Who was it? Target and
Toys R Us. Yeah. So if you're going to say, okay, well, I'll just let Amazon handle this part for me, hasn't exactly aged well. And one of the first that they did outside was Hudson News. If you remember, they did a couple of Hudson News locations in airports. And lo and behold, they're starting to open up Amazon.
I think they just did that to learn the airport business.
So, anyway. And who knows? Maybe it's just purely circumstantial.
It's just coincidence.
But
it's a nice category.
But here's the parallel I bring back whenever we talk about frictionless and the tech stack is think about the way the taxi industry, and this is really where the comparison comes from. I think Amazon Go didn't come from the retail environment; it came from the taxi environment. The Just Walk Out was created from a taxi, not from a store. And when
that's such an interesting perspective.
So when Uber created that experience, at the beginning it was very novel and very limited. I remember the first time I took it was coming out of New York, JFK or LaGuardia or whatever, I forget which one. But and it's funny because there's the series right now, about the Uber, I forget what it's called on one of the streaming services, but I lived that experience where we were a bunch of us staring at our phone screens in front of an airport for the first time. It was sort of freaky, right? But then 5 years down the road, here I am jumping in a regular cab because I don't know, the Uber's the delay was, or I was in a market where it was an Uber, and then I just walk out of the cab, and the cab honks at me, going, "Where you going, buddy?" I'm using a nice term, and it was probably a little rougher than
more
that.
colorful.
More colorful, yeah, absolutely.
Language is more colorful.
Where are you going? And I just oh my God, it's true. This isn't an Uber. Like I actually got to go back and fiddle with the credit card and the terminal that's not getting the signal because I need a receipt for my expense account, and just being, why isn't this all like that? Yeah. Like, how come this industry is so? I think convenience retail and beyond. There's a startup here in Montreal called Leave that I'm involved with, and they're using a much more accessible tech stack to even use it for like fashion retail and things like that, where you don't necessarily want to have the big, heavy computer vision shelf technology that works well in convenience and grocery, which doesn't necessarily translate properly to fashion. For instance, they have a beta actually running right now at Eaton Center at the Vianros. So it's just using your phone. The phone becomes sort of it replaces the whole tech stack. You just use the phone. It's appless, whatever, and it allows you just to walk in, grab whatever Vianros thing you're interested in, and walk out. Basically,
it's Walmart tried that in their pilot store.
Sam's.
Sam's has got. It's interesting. I don't generally look for the big box stores for that kind of innovation in digital, but I saw the woman who's the leader of Sam's. She's quite impressive. Yeah. And Walmart tried the kind of not just walk out, but scan and go, and it wasn't adopted. But they're taking another run at it. I think it may have been too early.
Definitely, and there's a lot of runs at it. My local Metro had the guns too. That here's a scan gun. I'm like, why do I need something else? I already have a phone that can do this. And it was. Did
you try the Sobeys smart cart?
No, I haven't tried that yet.
Okay, here's a quick perspective. If anybody from Sobeys listening, they know this, but the cart works fantastic. Like technically, it works fantastic. There's one problem: 4 or 5 words that at the end kill it. Please return cart to store.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you get to the back of the parking lot, and you got to walk all the way back to the store to relock your smart cart. And you can see why.
Yeah. It's an expensive piece of hardware, but that sort of creates a lot of friction around the whole experience. So I agree. But you know what? Hats off to Sobeys. Hats off to Walmart.
They're swinging the bat, right? They're trying.
I think
Target's doing a great job.
The lesson now, and I know this wasn't in our talk track, but even if you look at things like metaverse and all that, I mean, we sort of roll our eyes and go, "Oh, here we go again" on some other sort of frivolous.
Are you a meta skeptic, or are you a meta advocate, or are you meta indifferent? Where are you on that spectrum?
So well, anyways, just to wrap up before we get into the whole meta thing, the idea is you have to swing. You have to, the idea now that. Think about Walmart, and they're like, okay, we're behind the times. We need to make a $6 billion acquisition to pick up a thing called Jet to at least bring us 30% closer to to where we should be.
And the talent that built it.
And definitely the talent. Look at yesterday's announcement, Lululemon with Mirror, I think is the same thing. So to the metaverse question, sort of a full, I think... it's very early days. You and I were around to remember what 1995 internet looked like. Yeah. Could we have foreseen what 2022 internet would deliver based on a Lycos search of 1995 box? We'd be really struggling to understand where this could go. Did it go where we thought it would go? Was there a year 2000 where a bunch of companies got taken to the woodshed? Absolutely, and I think we're going to see a lot of that as well.
It'll be a year 2020, 2022 when they get taken. They're being taken to the woodshed now.
So yeah, I mean, who knows? It's still not, it hasn't fully played out yet. But I think the companies, back to my jet analogy, don't want to be seen. They want to at least play around. So I roll my eyes sometimes when I see it's actually a Montreal-based company, Sandbox. So I see Carrefour opening up in Sandbox, and it seems like nothing. It just seems like, I don't know, just a bad Roblox experience. But it was, at least they're trying. They're there. They're sort of trying to wrap their head around what the possibilities are. What I'm really for, Michael, and why I think coming back to the acceleration as well, and encouraging businesses to, I don't think it's a good time to sort of scale back your digital investment.
Right.
Is I think you need to sort of step your foot in this, because we're not, metaverse or not, we're definitely headed towards a more immersive digital path to purchase. I think we're going to have more and more context. It's almost archaic. I'm looking around our CL show here, Michael, and I'm pretty sure the CL show 20 years ago looked pretty close to this.
I'm sure the carpet's the same.
It's not, and it's not a knock of CL. I'm just saying that. Think about how everything else has evolved in that time.
But it's funny, right? You mean the chatter on the floor is, I couldn't do what I do here virtually. Right? Like, so the general narrative. You still need this.
Right. And that's my point. But you could have a lot more context. The fact that I roamed around here for 20 minutes before I could find you. These are all things that, and it's things we put up with, but my kids are probably not going to put up. My kids probably would have pieced out, after 5, saying this is ridiculous. Like when I'm in Fortnite, I'm able to find my way around a lot more easier than when I'm roaming around Palais des Congrès. So why can't I have at least a sort of a layer of that on top, or more context? And
I found a good one a good example. Next time you're in Toronto, LCBO just opened up a new flagship, 24,000 square feet.
Yep.
And the first impression, I walked in there, it's vast, a sea of bottles. I'm like, I just want to find my...
And the problem is?
Right. So the problem is finding the one I'm looking for.
Okay. I thought you were going to say try them all, but that's okay.
Well, you could work your way through it. God knows I tried. So they had a store finder where you could actually type it in, and it would actually gray out where in the store you could find it. And I thought, it's a nice, simple solution. It's beautiful.
Absolutely.
Right?
And that you may bring up a really good point. With a lot of these technologies, we tend to overcomplicate things till we get them simplified again.
Yeah. I don't need to put an Oculus on to find the wine. Just show me on the kiosk.
Yeah, no, we're not walking around with VR headsets any day soon. That's yesterday in the presentation, I actually had a slide like that with a person in one of those sort of drivable carts with a VR headset on it, and then with a big X saying, "This is not it." After having shown them a video that our friend Dave Marcotte and I started NRF already, I guess, 2 or 3 years ago, around the store of the future, and we're trying to figure out. We don't know what the hardware is going to look like. We just have an idea. We just have an idea what the software should do, and data and all that fun stuff. So we're heading towards a world that is definitely more that, but not. It's more that. Here's a deep thought for you. It's more that, but it's not less this.
So,
which is really great to say on a podcast, because there's only audio and I'm pointing to things. So it's just to basically say it's going to be more digital, but it's not going to be less physical. So as I see our room host,
Okay, we have to get him in. Have to get him in on the mic.
No.
When he gets a chance.
Is there a doctor entering the house?
Sure.
Well, I don't know. Michael said you're the one paying me to be here, that I should be getting a check in the mail. Or I said I had to send you a check.
Well, Mike hasn't gotten my bill yet.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're joined by a very special guest, Sylvain Charlebois. Welcome to our podcast studio. How do you know Carl?
So, Sylvain, this is a very important moment in podcast history. We're actually French Canadians outnumbering English Canadians on a podcast. I don't think that's
very
ever
rare.
I don't think that's ever happened before.
True. Yeah, no, absolutely.
We were just talking about, catching up, talking about in-store technology and where it's going. And, Carl was saying how, when you look at the Couche-Tard pilot that's going on at Sherbrooke, how do you scale that?
Yep.
And what does that look like in the future? And what are you hearing around technology yourself around the stores? That difference between useful technology and just technology for technology's sake out there in the future that you still got to do a little bit of. What's your perspective on that in the food business?
Well, the food industry is known to be very traditional and somewhat seen as anti-technology from the outside. Inside, when you talk to people, well, we're all about technology. We love technology. Well, not really. If it compromises traditions and traffic, foot traffic, forever. I mean, foot traffic was a key metric for retail until Amazon bought Whole Foods in 2017. That was a bit of a disruptive transaction, and that led a lot of companies to think about clicks and collect. But there was no full commitment until COVID. I think COVID really just accelerated this conversion, looking at technology inside and out. So interacting with consumers, and of course, operationally looking at automation or robotics. Making burgers with robots is not that cool anymore. It's a necessity almost because of labor issues.
Labor issues, which is another thing we didn't talk about, is that not a short-term labor issue for making your Starbucks coffee, right? You need those robots now more than ever, right?
So that's what I'm hearing, and on the Food Professor podcast, we'll actually be joined by Yannick Gervais, who's the president of Olimel.
Yeah.
And since a couple of strikes ago, they've been thinking about automation a lot more.
No doubt.
Yeah. And that's across the board in any industry right now. Any redundant task that can be automated out. I mean, there's the economic arguments to do so are
pretty compelling.
Stronger and stronger. I mean, and that's from the first mile to the last mile.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what's happening. Wherever they can automate the non-margin adding experiences like checkout, which rarely add margin, except for maybe some impulse buys, that can happen at the very end.
Yeah,
they're not.
There's a lot of retailers who just don't want to give up on full checkout. I mean, they think it's part of the experience, which is not untrue, but I don't know.
I know. I was sharing something with Michael. Where the Go experience came from was from Uber. So how many people thought that pulling out their credit card and dealing with a terminal as they ended their taxi ride was a value add experience?
Yeah.
I think as we get into environments where we can shop and if there's two ways for me to exit the store, one where I have to get in line and pay somebody to get out, and there's another one where I don't.
Well, if you got 50, I don't know. If you got 50 things, you might make that different decision.
But
that's self-checkout. That's different. That's different than what I'm talking about. You're talking about scanning your own stuff, and I agree. That's like a stopgap measure right now because the rest of the technology, the business case, isn't strong enough. But when it's going to be at a point what the Amazon Fresh is doing and all that, where I'm just walking around with my cart, taking an apple out of a bundle and throwing it in the cart, and it knows that I put an apple in my cart, and I don't have anything else to do. That's going to be a pretty compelling argument.
And this is so I've been in Florida for 5 months now, and
that's why you got the good 10.
The self checkouts,
handsome man,
they figured it out. And so, to Carl's point, I got to tell you, flawless, produce, no problem. You just put it in the box. Everything's done for you. You do not want to see someone. You do not want to talk to someone because it's even more convenient. It saves you time, gets rid of the worst part of the grocery experience, which is the exit. Yeah. It really and we're 5 people in our family in Tampa Bay, and we're talking 55, 60 items sometimes. No problem.
No problem.
Huh. Yeah. So, and I don't think that Canadian grocers have actually made it a priority to create this flawless, humanless experience when you exit the grocery store, I don't think.
I was at Walmart in Mississauga doing a tour, and they actually had 2 choices when you did self-checkout. Lots of stuff. I think they had a number, but they did bigger bunks. So they had lots of stuff for a few items.
Right.
So they actually routed you to. They had, banks and banks of self-checkout, and lots of associates running around helping people. Like it was flawless, but they did have that extra space if you had more than, but you still had to scan it yourself, right?
Again, it's a stopgap. I mean, the ROI, I was actually one of the surprising things that happened during the pandemic was the amount of self-checkout. I mean, from Dollarama to Costco to Canadian Tire, I mean, everything was just really a hard pivot. But because the business case was so easy, the tech is so cheap to do that it pays for itself in 6 months. And so you'd be crazy not to do it while you let the rest of the technology catch up.
And it's also probably the case, I get asked a lot less by media, doesn't it take someone else's job? Well, we don't have the people, so you're not taking anybody's job.
Exactly.
You're filling a job.
But it's a very important point, because that was sort of the public perception of a grocer doing that was like, we're taking away, this 16 or 17-year-old job. The reality is the 16 or 17-year-old job has 100 jobs available for them if they want, without having to be a cashier at a grocery store.
Yeah,
right.
No, absolutely. And of course, the profitability. What's different with food versus other sectors is this malaise, the margins that does create a malaise with the public. I'm often asked, are grocers making too much money? And so my response back to whoever's talking to me, I say, okay, so if you think that they're making too much money, what is enough? What is the threshold here? Is it 3%? Is it 4%? What are we talking about here? And that's when you realize they haven't thought things through yet. Which goes back to how much you pay your employees, how many employees you need to operate a grocery store, and those are the kinds of conversations we need to have out in the open.
I mean, it's such an interesting point, because it still makes headlines when grocers executives get bonuses.
Yeah.
It's why is that front page news?
Yeah,
but it still is.
And it's also driving diversification. So with this group I was with yesterday, most of them now are acquiring pharmacies and health centers and everything else, because they can build the average basket out beyond. And where I think the food industry, the grocery sector specifically, has its chin out is it is the highest velocity and volume channel that you can brick everything on top of. So the Amazons of the world will use the whole category as a loss leader if they have to, if it just creates an opportunity to pile on the higher margin stuff around it. And Walmart's doing that with health.
The flywheel,
Costco.
Spin the flywheel.
Exactly.
Right? Well, Carl Boutet, we had a special guest join us. Thank you, Sylvain, for popping in. We've had
beautiful place you have here, Sylvain. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, actually, Michael work on the decoration.
Well, next time I'd like it to be in Tampa, though. Would be a bit nicer by this see we can see.
Next time, absolutely.
And Carl, you're going to be in London. Last words. You're off to a little European travel.
Yeah, next week is the Retail Technology Show in London. So I'm actually speaking on the Tuesday about the underused opportunity, Dr. Charlebois, to leverage academics to work in the retail sector, which is something that, especially with my work since with McGill, I've come to really appreciate.
You're well positioned.
The depth that can bring, and I think is more and more necessary. And the second day, we're talking about supply chain issues, which will part of a panel. So that's the Retail Technology Show next week at the Olympia, which is the first time I'm going to that venue, which I'm excited about.
And very nice.
So nice to be back on the road. Hopefully everything goes smoothly. And then June, back in Bangkok teaching at the Asian Institute of Technology.
You were in the UK last year, weren't you?
2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
Time is flying.
It's so nice to be back out. But thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the food professor for getting us out here. Who's on my TV seems like every other day, but that's it's nice to see him for real.
Safe travels as you make your way around and back to Canada. And thanks so much for joining me on the Voice of Retail podcast, Sylvain. Thanks for being the special pop-in guest too.
My pleasure.
Literally, thank you.
Thanks for tuning into this special episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, be sure and click and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically twice a week. And check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Conversations with Commerce Next Podcast, and the Food Professor Podcast with Dr. Sylvain Charlebois. Last but not least, if you're into barbecue, check out my all-new YouTube barbecue show, Last Request Barbecue, with new episodes each and every week. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of M.E. LeBlanc Company and Maven Media. And if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at meleblanc.co. Have a safe week, everyone.